We're joined on the programme by the leader of the Labour Party, the MP for Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn. Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us on the show.
Very welcome.
When the government says the housing market is broken, A, do you agree with them? And B, what do they mean?
I agree with them that there is a problem with the market, but I'm very unclear as to what they mean, because they've built very few homes, and in London they've allowed, indeed their policies have encouraged the crisis to get much worse, with the attempting to force councils to sell high-value properties, the lack of effective regulation of the private rented sector, and the lack of new build of council homes for social rent. And even when a housing association wants to make a big development, they're forced to finance it from the sale of properties or parts of the site. And so the actual benefit for those in desperate housing need is very, very limited indeed. I mean, I represent an inner city constituency in Islington North, and it's a problem that I deal with day in, day out, of desperate families, very overcrowded flats, often 6 months private sector tenancies, being forced to move every few months, and too often move outside the borough, so the children's school is disrupted, and then often disrupted again as that tenancy collapses and another one is looked for. And I actually feel very sorry for those families. I also feel very sorry for the people working in the housing departments of our very hard-pressed councils, because they have a very, very difficult job dealing with huge demand, and they just don't have the resources to cope with it. So when this white paper comes out, I hold my breath, but I hope the government is going to recognise that building a large number of council houses and giving local authorities the powers to do it is an essential part of the agenda.
I mean, people will remember, those with long memories, that there wasn't much of a campaign of building social housing under the Labour Party either, but they will wonder what you would do. I mean, what would you immediately do to alleviate the problem in Islington North?
First of all, end the forced sale of council houses by a government edict. Secondly, end the right to buy. Thirdly, encourage councils by giving them the borrowing powers to build new council housing. And fourthly, regulation of the private rented sector, so that families on ordinary income can remain living in our inner city communities, because London is creating for itself a social problem of enormous proportions because of the housing shortage, but it's also actually creating for itself an economic problem, as people have to commute longer and longer distances in order to do jobs in central London. And that in the end becomes economically self-defeating, because either firms are going to have trouble recruiting, or the costs of travel mean that there's even more crowding on our railways, roads, and so on. It's the need to have a balanced supply of housing in all our big cities is very important, and London is an example of that. American cities do actually regulate the private rented sector.
Sajid Javid says that London is less densely populated than Paris or Berlin, that there's plenty of room and space in London to build more and more homes. He talks about building extra floors on the top of existing blocks of flats. He talks, as practically anyone with political ambition at all in any party, about building on TfL land or around railway stations or tube stations, that kind of thing. And I wonder whether that's your experience in Islington North, whether you feel it isn't densely populated and it isn't crowded, or whether you feel it's already crowded. I mean, we had a story only last week about it taking 4 days of driving round and round to find a parking space in London.
Well, Islington North is a small, very densely populated community. We do have some building sites, we do have some land, not very much. The council is very innovative, in some cases, at building on underused car parks on estates, in some cases converting garages, and they've done that in a very innovative, very clever way. But the problem is the financing of it, and when the private sector tries to build or convert a place, they are able to use planning regulations which give permitted development rights, which means no planning permission is needed at all. Therefore, we get a development, in our case, always of 9 units, to avoid the social housing obligation. I think we need to give our local authorities more power. It's heartbreaking going to schools in my constituency, talking to teachers there about the number of children that are either travelling very long distances to try to retain the place in the school in the hope that they can get who just leave, and therefore that is also disruptive of the class. We need strong communities, and you get strong communities by secure housing.
Do you think the aspiration still should be to own a property, and do you feel that there's any likelihood of that aspiration being realised by the majority of people even listening to this programme this morning?
I think the opportunity to own a property should very much be there, and I think it is important that you do have genuinely affordable places to buy for first-time buyers. But what the government thinks of as affordable first-time buyers is certainly not, in the experience of most of us, of families on average incomes. And so I do think there is a role for the local authorities and the government in this. Indeed, many people bought flats many years ago because the then Greater London Council provided very low interest rate, very quick mortgages only for first-time buyers and only for youngish people, and that actually helped quite a lot because it meant that many were able to get somewhere to live, and also that meant less pressure on the social housing demands.
And what would you call affordable in 2017?
Well, something that somebody can get a mortgage for if they're earning average or around that sort of income. At the moment, the affordable homes are aimed at people with a sort of family income of 80 to 90,000. Well, for a single person, that would be 3 times the average income.
What do you make of the controversy surrounding Speaker Bercow's outburst about Donald Trump, saying President Trump not welcome to address Parliament on the grounds of racism and sexism?
The Speaker speaks for Parliament. He's elected by all members of the House. He's therefore independent. He has the authority over Westminster Hall and over that aspect of state visits, and I think he's spoken absolutely clearly that Donald Trump and his misogyny and his racism and his behaviour over international law, particularly on the Convention on Refugees, I think he's absolutely right, and I welcome the statement.
And what about the notion that the tradition and the convention and the obligation of the Speaker is to be neutral at all times?
Well, he's neutral between parties and is scrupulously fair at the way that he presides over the House of Commons. He has the authority and responsibility to deal with issues of state visits and access to Westminster Hall, and he's set out his position very clearly. He believes passionately in the rule of law, human rights and justice, and he said that yesterday and said that Donald Trump would not be welcome because of the statements that he's made.
And
it's very odd that a President of the United States should be invited on a state visit after only 8 days in office. And Barack Obama had to wait until his second term to be invited. Other presidents weren't even invited at all.
But what of the special relationship and the urgency post-Brexit to form new trade alliances and the hand-holding that we all saw between President Trump and Prime Minister May? What do you make of that?
We all need trade relations with everywhere in the world, and obviously we go into the Brexit negotiations looking at the trade issues for the future, but we also need to have regard for future peace, future justice, future human rights, and the idea that a president could try to override his own courts to ban people from 7 countries from visiting the United States is quite extraordinary. And the proposal to build this massive 1,000-mile wall between the USA and Mexico, that isn't the signs of a man who's looking for peace and concord with his neighbours.
Thank you very much indeed. Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party.